Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Before I say anything more, I want to congratulate my beautiful co-host on her 39th birthday. And
39 and holding.
And holding. you don't get older, you get better. All right. Well, congratulations and happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right. It's called for the People Act. That's what Democrats are calling an election reform. So why Republicans call it a federal power grab? The bill mandates early voting and outlaws voter ID requirements, making it easy to manipulate elections and difficult to detect fraud. CBN's Jenna Browder has that story.
With the House back in session this week, H.R. 1 is on the floor. Every House Democrat has signed on to the legislation, which aims to reform federal elections. But Republicans say not so fast.
But you can't ever accept when they steal and rig and rob.
After the turbulent 2020 election, followed by the deadly assault on the Capitol, many agree election reform is needed. Unfortunately, what that looks like depends on the side doing the talking. For Democrats, it comes in the form of H.R. 1, which they call the For the People Act. This legislation aims to basically create a nationalized voting system requiring uniform rules for all states. It would, for example, mandate early voting, then same-day registration, outlaw voter ID requirements, and allow ballot harvesting.
The Democrats have been campaigning on two key provisions.
California Congressman Ro Khanna sees it as common sense reform.
One, that every person should have an equal right to vote, and that the voting rights really matter, and especially after the passage passing of John Lewis. Many Americans believe that we shouldn't have lobbyists and big donors and big money influencing our politics, and this would really try to get rid of a lot of the influence of big money.
Conservatives counter that the For the People Act only benefits progressives and liberals by helping them keep control in Washington.
It is full of federal mandates and prohibitions that would, in essence, weaken all of the security protocols in the election process and, frankly, make it easy to cheat, easy to manipulate election results, and very difficult for states to detect or deter election fraud.
Hans von Spakovsky with the Heritage Foundation was once a commissioner on the Federal Election Commission, which enforces federal laws on federal campaigns.
They're claiming it's all about access to the ballot box. But what they forget to tell folks is that you have to have both access and security. And there's no reason, for example, to do what H.R. 1 does, which is to make it illegal for any state to have a voter ID requirement.
Khanna disagrees that getting rid of the ID requirement would open the door for fraud.
I don't think so. I mean, the studies have not shown that voter fraud is rampant. I mean, I know that this is a big dispute. A lot of the voters who are not voting in some of these states are conservative voters, which is why you saw the Trump team putting such an effort on increasing voter turnout. So I think we all should be for higher voter turnout, and I don't think that's necessarily always going to benefit the Democrats.
The legislation, first introduced 2 years ago, would also require political groups to disclose high-dollar donors, create reporting requirements for online political ads, and in a nod to Trump, obligate presidents to disclose their tax returns. And with Democrats holding the majority in the House, Senate, and White House, this could be their time. The bill's fate ultimately depends on if enough Republicans will consider the legislation that they've rejected time and time again. If not, Democrats could eliminate the Senate filibuster, which would get rid of the 60-vote requirement. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Well, as they say, elections have consequences. You know, the simple way to be, the biggest problem was sending ballots just recklessly throughout the population and not having them requested. The idea is if somebody wants an absentee ballot, let them ask for it and then absolutely verify their signature, nothing else. And if they do that, it'll make a huge difference. So one of the problems in the last election that they sent out hundreds and maybe thousands of ballots, just sent them out to people. They didn't know who they were and who they were getting them, and some people were dead, and some of them were underage, some of them weren't qualified, et cetera. And it's just so simple. And then when they come in, was it your signature, and verify the signature, period. But the idea you can't have voter ID, that people are going to harvest ballots, that's something that's wrong. They go, you know, the way they used to do it, I mean, could still do it, they could go to, say, a nursing home or a place where the senior citizens live and go around and gather up their ballots and then mark them the way they want to and dump the whole bunch in. That's ballot harvesting, and that should be illegal. There are many things that are wrong, but this legislation doesn't address it. Well, in New York, boy, oh boy, he's up to his neck and sinking fast. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is drowning in allegations over sexual impropriety and a scandal over nursing home deaths in his state. John Jessup has more on that story.
Pat, a third woman has come forward, adding her voice to other sexual harassment claims against Governor Cuomo, sparking growing calls for accountability from his critics, including some leading Democrats. CBN Washington correspondent Tara Mergener has more.
The state attorney general's office is now leading what's being called a rigorous investigation. This as calls for Governor Cuomo's resignation grow louder, and he maintains his innocence.
I know that there is a pattern of abusive and manipulative behavior from him. I do think that it is time for our governor to resign.
Calls from inside his own party that Cuomo should step down are intensifying after several women came out with sexual harassment claims, among them 2 former staffers.
She alleges that the governor asked her direct questions about her sex life, whether or not she was monogamous in her relationships, whether or not she had ever slept with an older man.
Charlotte Bennett telling the New York Times it happened last spring, and that while the governor never got physical, he told her he was open to relationships with women in their 20s. She says, "I understood that the governor wanted to sleep with me and felt horribly uncomfortable and scared." Cuomo denies the allegations and in a statement Sunday says, "Some of the things I have said have been misinterpreted as an unwanted flirtation. To the extent anyone felt that way, I am truly sorry about that."
That's not an apology. He seemed to be saying, "Oh, I was just kidding around." You know, sexual harassment is not funny.
Cuomo also denies earlier sexual harassment claims by former aide Lindsey Boylan.
It's just not true.
Facing backlash over plans to name his own investigator, Cuomo has referred the case to the New York State Attorney General.
We have to keep politics out of this, get what actually did or did not happen.
The White House also now calling for an independent review.
And that's certainly something he supports and we believe should move forward as quickly as possible.
The new allegations come as the FBI investigates whether Governor Cuomo covered up the coronavirus death toll in New York's nursing homes.
The truth is everybody did everything they could.
The scrutiny growing by the day and now reaching a boiling point. Fox News contributor Janice Dean telling CBN News the death of her in-laws in a New York nursing home led her to speak out against the governor.
I was learning this after my in-laws died. We had no idea that there was this executive order in place, and I wasn't seeing the news stories out there.
There are also reports that bipartisan calls to strip Cuomo of emergency pandemic powers are gaining steam. Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Increasing pressure for Governor Cuomo. Pat?
There are 2 states we mentioned yesterday in the program. One is California, where there's a recall petition going on against Gary Newsom, and the same thing in New York with Cuomo. If this prevails, you might have a flip, a major flip that would involve House of Representatives seats. You could involve the possible presidential election, and those 2 states are just, they've been written off immediately. They're not called battleground states because they were given over to the Democrats. Now these 2 Democrat governors are mismanaging things so badly that the American people in those states are saying, we've had enough, and there could be a seismic shift. especially in the House of Representatives. And if things continue as they are now, my prediction would be that the Republicans will win control of the House and Nancy Pelosi will no longer be the Speaker. John?
Pat, cancel culture critics say the move to erase an iconic American author has now reached the White House. Today, March 2nd, is Read Across America Day, traditionally held on Dr. Seuss's birthday because of his contribution to children's literature. President Joe Biden did not mention Dr. Seuss in the annual White House proclamation, breaking with past presidents who paid tribute to the author. A Northern Virginia school district began the move to distance Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, from the annual event. While Loudoun County public school officials cite research that claims strong racial undertones in Dr. Seuss's books, they are not banning them from district libraries or classrooms. The organization that preserves the author's legacy also announced it will stop publishing 6 titles due to racist images. Pat?
The Grinch stole Christmas, and that's racist. You know, there's a madness taking over my home state. This is the Old Dominion. This is the place where Harry Byrd was the leader, the Byrd machine. I can't believe Loudoun County has gotten that bad. But the trouble is they're spilling over from Washington to D.C., and this is craziness. But to think that Loudoun County doesn't want Dr. Seuss and the Grinch and all those wonderful books that he wrote, oh, man. Please, I do think if there's a revolution coming, I'd like to see it here in the Old Dominion. John?
Pat, turning to the Middle East, the first ever ambassador from the United Arab Emirates to the Jewish state arrived in Israel on Monday. Mohammed Al-Khaja presented his credentials to President Reuven Rivlin, who thanked God in both Hebrew and Arabic. This as Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain reportedly are in talks about a possible security alliance. An unnamed source telling the Jerusalem Post the matter is being informally discussed. And Pat, the report comes at a time of growing tensions in the region over Iran and the Biden administration's plan to rejoin the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal.
Well, I do think that those Arab countries feel that they're more threatened by Iran than they are by Israel. And the fact that Israel and the Saudis and the Bahrainis and others are making a treaty is just a big, big deal. They haven't signed one yet with Saudi Arabia, but it's coming. And it's a tremendous move. But I point you again to Ezekiel 38. Israel is living at peace in the land. And suddenly there's this coalition that involves Persia, which is Iran, and those northern associates that will be identified in Turkey, Gog and Magog, that will come against Israel in the latter days. And it's all setting up. Israel is going to be at peace, and the Arabs recognize that Iran is their biggest threat, not Israel. And to me, it's an encouraging thing that if it would bring peace, it would be a wonderful thing for the world.